Right. Evening, councillors. Welcome everybody to this virtual council meeting of Norwich City Council. This meeting is being held under the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panel's Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panel Meetings, England and Wales, Regulation 2020, meaning that decisions made will have the same validity as those made at a meeting held at City Hall. We've elected members of the council attending the meeting. We also have the council's monitoring officer as part of the meeting, as well as democratic services staff to record the votes. Members must be able to hear and, where practical, see other members. Therefore, we ask all members to keep their video on during the business of the meeting. A recording of this meeting will appear on the council's YouTube channel and the meeting will be live streamed. If we are notified that this link is not working, we will take a short adjournment while the issue is resolved. Can I ask participants to ensure that they are muted when they're not speaking, or when you're muted, or you'll be muted by an officer to maintain audio quality. The chat function is enabled for members to report technical difficulties and to indicate that they would like to speak on an item, but you would only be able to message the chair and democratic services. If you wish to speak on an item, please use the chat function to indicate during the item. Please do not indicate via chat for future items. Voting will be done by exception. This means that I will ask for votes against, then abstentions, and the remainder of the members present will therefore be voting in favour, although I will still ask you to raise your hand in favour. I ask at the appropriate time you raise your hand clearly in front of the screen and keep it there until we move to the next part of the vote. Please bear with us while we count the votes, as this may take a little longer than usual as officers check between screens to ensure all members have been seen. I've received apologies from Councillors Manning, Councillor Vivian Thomas and Councillor Neal. And Lord Mayor's announcements. I've been to quite a few events and meetings, but just to quote a few, but all of them will be on in the minutes when it's published. Of course, it's very important, November. I attended the dedication of the Garden of Remembrance outside the Norwich Cathedral, the Remembrance service at the War Memorial in front of City Hall on the Sunday, Armistice service outside, that is adjacent to St. Peter Mancroft Church. And I also attended the launch of a food bank at the Norwich Central Mosque, which is very good. That again outside, but we fed over 30 families to the wider community. Really good. At this stage, I'd like to invite Councillor Alan Waters to say a few words about Colin Thrower and Councillor Driver to say a few words about former Councillor Roy Durant, former Lord Mayor, who both sadly passed away recently.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Colin Thrower died in the spring, and I wanted the opportunity to say a few words about Colin. Actually, I think most people on the council will remember Colin as someone who came along on election night and helped Hannah with the votes and the tallying, and he did that for a number of years. He was also the independent member on the Standards Committee. But I remember him from the time that he was Deputy City Treasurer. And when I joined the council between 1988 and 1992, Colin, who was responsible for the collection of local taxation, which to start with was the rates and local business rates.
Yeah, now I have.
Was then responsible for changing the system from that long-standing system of taxation to the pool tax, otherwise known euphemistically as the community charge. And of course, that had a disastrous short history. And then Colin was responsible for introducing the council tax. So he was an extremely capable officer, highly professional, very supportive for elected members, and he served many years as a stalwart of the City Council. He was also a very active trade unionist and a member of Norwich Unison. So a fine officer, somebody who continued his connection with the City Council during local elections and acting as the independent member for the Standards Committee, and a fine contribution to the work of the Council.
Lord Mayor, I think it's me. Yeah, I've just found out Sunday night that one of our ex-Lord Mayors, Roy Durham, died on Sunday night after an illness. He had pulposis. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is the scar of the lung. I'd just like to say a few words about him. He was a city councillor and a county councillor for over 30 years in Norwich, and represented Lakenham Ward, and also elected Hayham Ward, if people can remember where Hayham Ward was before the reorganisation. There's one or two people on here who still remember that. He was a Lakenham councillor with my father, and I forgot who the other name of the councillor is now. And I can remember them sitting in the council chamber, and every time one of those three stood up, the rest of the Labour group would go, "Oh no, here come those troublemakers from Lakenham again." But as all good Lakenham troublemakers, we became Lord Mayors. And he was an excellent Lord Mayor in 1993, proposed by Steve Morphew in those days. Alan Waters was here in those days. He was also the Deputy Post Office Governor at Fort Road. And he was there when they brought in the first post codes, the NR1s and NR2s. We were the first people in Britain to actually have a post code, and he brought that through. We were also one of the first ones to have a sorting machine at Fort Road, which actually sorted them out on the post codes, and he went through this. And he also was part of the strike in the 80s, where they all went on strike over better wages and loss of jobs, where his job was, as being Deputy Post Office General, is to go out and try to get them back in. But he got told off by his boss because he gave them duty-free cigarettes, and that was said about he tried to make them stay outside. He was regional secretary for the Post Office Workers Union for over 30 years. And I've known him all my life. I think I've known him since I was about 6, when I first went round his house in Loxley Road in South Hartford. That's where I first knew him. And I've been friends with Roy all my life and kept in touch with him near enough all the time as well. I last saw him about 6 or 7 months ago, where he was still conscious and still talking well. He loved Norwich City Football Club, and I'm glad he survived long enough to see him go to the top of the Football League again on Sunday before he passed away Sunday evening. So I'd just like to ask Lord Mayor if we could have a minute's silence for an ex-Lord Mayor of Norwich, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Driver. Yep, a minute silence. Could I ask everyone to all switch the screens to mute, please, for a minute silence? Thank you. Item 2, we'll move to declarations of interest. I understand that the following councillors have a pecuniary interest in item 9A and have requested and been granted a dispensation to participate in the debate and vote on the item. Councillors Giles, Graham, Osborne, Vaughan Thomas, Schmierer, Joseph. Do any members have any other declarations of interest to make on any items on the agenda? No? Don't see any.
Sorry, I've got my hand up.
Oh,
Yes,
I've got
a pecuniary interest on that same item as well, please.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Nope. Okay. We'll move to item 3, questions from the public. There have been no public questions received for this meeting, so that's that dealt with. Petitions, there have been no petitions received for this meeting either. So we'll move to item 4, the minutes. I call upon Councillor Waters to move the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of September 2020.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally moved.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Bogerline to second the minutes.
Formally seconded.
Thank you. We'll now move to a vote. All those against? None. Not see anyone. Abstentions? Same, I think. All those in favour? Okay, thank you. Resolution's been carried. Item 5, questions to Cabinet members and committee chairs. There have been 13 questions from members of the Council to Cabinet members, of which notice has been given in accordance with the provisions of Appendix 1 of the Council's Constitution. A copy will be available on the Council's website. Members who have asked questions are permitted to put a supplementary question to the Cabinet member. Question 1. Councillor Wright, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, yes. Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Waters, for your answer. Given that the failure to file the 14th September appointments until 20th of November, some 3 days after my question was submitted, was a breach of Section 167 of the Companies Act 2006 by the company and its officers, does Councillor Waters, as a representative of the shareholder, have confidence in the legal advice provided to the company by MP Law, and by extension, confidence in the legal advice provided by them to this council? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waters?
Yes, I do. Clearly a discrepancy. You're right to highlight it, but I hardly see that as a cause for concern to the extent that we have in place a very strong board of in terms of governance and accountability, and that seems to me to be the substantive issue.
Thank you. Question 2. Councillor Lubbock, do you have a supplementary question?
Oh dear. Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to ask, thank Councillor Maguire for his answer on the effects of burning and fuel has on pollution levels, and I'm pleased to hear that the DEFRA monitoring shows that the Baconfield site does not breach the WHO guidelines, but that's not to say that there isn't air pollution there from this type of burning. Could I ask whether an alternative site could be suggested to DEFRA, a more dense site elsewhere in the city, a comparison? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire.
The short answer is I'm not 100% certain that we can. Normally the DEFRA chooses the sites it wishes for representative purposes, but I will get you a definitive answer to that question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question 3. Councillor Joseph, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary, Lord Mayor, only to thank Councillor Stannard for his positive response and to say that I'm looking forward to seeing this suggestion implemented.
Thank you. Councillor Bergline, do you have a supplementary question on question 4?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. Thank you for the response. And I think it clearly established that a deep clean to clean up the traces of feces at this site has been established as necessary because it was ordered. I would just like to correct that the resident had actually received a letter on the 19th of August, which stated that the assigned officer had requested such a deep clean. Can the cabinet member therefore explain why it has then taken until the 25th of September for this request to show up in the system, and what can be done to reduce these delays in the future, please?
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Well, as you're aware, I don't actually have access to the case notes, so I can't comment on the dates. If you want to put it in writing to me, I'll certainly ask officers to look at that again. If it is a priority clean, we will do our utmost to get something done very quickly. But as it says in the response, there didn't seem to be, there was no sort of sign of anything or smell. So it went through as an ordinary clean, and that has to be ordered and it has to be put into the works. So I'm afraid there will always be a bit of a delay in normal circumstances. But please, Sandra, put it in writing if you want me to sort of query the date, because I'll happily get that looked at. And I'd also say at this point that if any councillor is ever struggling with a piece of casework, because you do mention that you email several times and trying to get an answer, please come to the cabinet member. We can't always unlock the question, unlock things, but sometimes we can get to an officer quickly and try and see what's happening. So I'm sure any cabinet member would be happy to help with the relevant portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 5. Councillor Schmierer, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much, Councillor Stannard, for your answer about a potential tall buildings policy for Norwich. And I was particularly pleased to read the penultimate paragraph in your response, which said, and if I may quote, the council is intending to update the city centre conservation area appraisal in the coming year. This will, caveated, present an opportunity to amend policies relating to building height and views. However, if we are to show a true commitment to protecting the many heritage and cultural assets in the city centre, then surely this could and should be complemented by a tall buildings policy, given the conveyor belt of large and imposing developments that have come to planning committee in recent years, Anglia Square being just one of those.
Thank you. Councillor Stannard.
Well, you're asking me to preempt a review, which of course I can't do. But I mean, what I would say, I'll just say again that the Secretary of State and the Planning Inspector both were in agreement that there was nothing in our policies which expressly supported or went against a tall building in Anglia Square. And they both felt that. And neither of them highlighted it as a problem or being a material part of the decision that was made, and neither of us called for us to make any other. I mean, I see you smirking, I see you grimacing there. I mean, the absence or otherwise of a policy as being relevant to the outcome is what I'm saying. It seems so. We've been through the mill really with the Secretary of State and the Planning Inspector looking at this, and they've noted our position and they're not in any way being critical. So to say that we're not showing true commitment, that we need another policy and maybe another one and another one, and every time we're showing more and more commitment, I mean, I just don't think the evidence for that stacks up. So we are going to have a review. We will constantly review our policies. And if we felt there was a need, then clearly the position would change. But at the moment, I don't see any need. And I think we've got very good, robust policies in place.
Okay, thank you. Question 6. Councillor Osborne, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you to the Chair of Scrutiny for this response, and I will certainly be asking the committee to reconsider its decision regarding the fly tipping select committee. The Chair mentions in his response that he had obtained confirmation from officers ahead of the scrutiny meeting that the fly tipping select committee would be within their capacity. Labour councillors on the committee gave a different impression during the meeting, and I'm not clear on whether they had spoken to officers beforehand. In light of this, can the Chair please comment on how officer resource for scrutiny is assessed and utilised?
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Osborne, for your supplementary. In essence, the best way that officer resource can be assessed and utilised is through the work programme item on the agenda. Any item that is up before the committee for potential consideration can be discussed. Questions can be asked then of the officers directly about whether they feel that item is within their capacity or not. So I would always say to any member of the scrutiny committee, if you have any issues, please raise them during the work programme item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 7. Councillor Price, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Lord Mayor. Thank you. I'd like to thank the leader for his update. It was a very interesting read. And I know that it was disappointing that Labour used its constitutional power to force the withdrawal of an opposition party motion. But can the leader please share with me the work which the cabinet member said would be done in the autumn and demonstrate how the ideas proposed in the car-free city centre motion have received proper consideration, or simply admit that this commitment hasn't happened?
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
I wouldn't want Councillor Price to feel distressed by the time I finished my response to his supplementary question. And I think the point I was trying to make is that, and it was made by Councillor Stonard when this motion was being debated, was that it would require the involvement, the compliance, the consensus amongst a wide range of users of the city centre if we were to get a successful policy. It's always easy to wish for something to happen, but if you haven't got the means to work it through, then actually it's not going to get off the page. And so when I did some research on this question, I looked at it from the point of view of that broader landscape of the livable city. And I think all the different elements that I've put into the answer address the question in that broader sense, but do bring us to the point where we need to be able to enjoy the city centre in the best way possible, to enjoy clean air, enjoy walking through it, enjoy using it by moving around in different and non-polluting ways. And those are the issues which are part of this piece of work. And the recognition, for example, that during the first COVID lockdown, air quality did improve. That is something which I think we all had a sense of the importance and capitalise on that. And so the level of activity that I've listed, and it's just for this year, and is at a time of a really difficult period for the city, I think demonstrates a significant commitment to all of that. So I'd like you to feel that the glass was not half empty, but fairly well brimming with good ideas, which of course the council will want to engage with and is currently engaging with.
Thank you. Question 8, Councillor Carlow, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, please, Lord Mayor. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Waters, for your response. Just to reassure you, I don't have a particular interest in short stay lets, but I offered to take part in the select committee as part of my duties as a councillor and did the work to the best of my ability. And short stay lets and fly tipping were not Green Party topics, but came from city residents. So my question is, how do you think we can avoid wasting scrutiny member and officer time and raising hopes of residents in the future when nothing is likely to come out of any scrutiny recommendations, please?
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you for the supplementary, Councillor Carlo. I fear it's a rather gloomy prognosis about the work that the Scrutiny Committee does. There are many issues that we seek to address through the work of the Council. And I would say, first of all, that when the many recommendations came up to Cabinet to look at whether this was a priority, because these are difficult times and we have to prioritise. When we looked at the figures, and I've included them again in the answer, compared to the major piece of work which we all of us felt, was something we needed to address, which is the private rented sector. The scale of that issue and the challenge that presents was something that we felt was important that we put our resources into. So in a relative sense, I think the usefulness of the exercise was it identified the issues, it identified the scale of the issues. It is not ruled out in any way for the future. We now have the benefit of a knowledge of this, and it's on our, as it were, our landscape across the council. But at that particular time, it was very much about we need to put our resources into the private rented sector and protecting people in that sector. And I know that has a consensus across the council. I also know for the many thousands of people who live in that sector, some of them are in this room tonight, that is something that I think they would want to see us deal with. Sometimes you can't always get what you want in terms of order, and that's true of all of us. But I thank you for that piece of work. It was given careful and full consideration. And as I also say in my answer, you know, there are many areas where we have been able to work together collectively to make sure that we are addressing some of the most fundamental and difficult issues in the city. And so scrutiny plays a vital role in helping to form policy.
Thank you. Question 9. Councillor Erin Fulton McAllister, do you have a supplementary question?
No, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Question 10. Councillor Ryan, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. No supplementary, but I would like to thank Councillor Waters for his answer.
Thank you. Question 11. Councillor Mike Sands, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary, thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to thank Alan Waters for his comprehensive answer.
Thank you. Question 12. Councillor Maxwell, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Lord Mayor. Councillor Packer, I too was pleased that and proud that we had won these two awards. Would you agree with me that these achievements show how committed this council is to ensuring that all our parks and gardens are available for the benefit of all our residents?
Absolutely, spot on.
Thank you.
Well done, jumped in there. Thank you. Question 13. Councillor McCartney-Gray, do you have a supplementary question?
No supplementary, Lord Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Maguire for his response.
Thank you. Moving on, item 6, adjustment to the 2020-2021 capital programme. I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 6.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. This is to vary the capital programme budget and involves a number of issues. 0.175 million will be spent on the Hyam Park Pavilion, where there was substantial fire damage. £500,000 will be spent on IT new laptop computers. As we all know, as a result of the COVID pandemic, we've had a lot of officers work from home, and I think we would all agree that we need to facilitate the use of IT to maximise efficiency and actually to allow staff to work independently. So I think this is also an extremely good idea. Then we have an increase in the tourism grants. This is 0.25 million, and which includes improvements to street furniture, alternative cycle routes, and road traffic blocks. And then finally, we have the Towns Fund, an increase of 0.608 million, and the various items included in this are to be found on page 44. So I'd ask the Council to approve this report. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Mike Sands to second the item.
I second the item, and Council's spoken very well on it. Sorry, lost for words there for a moment, which is rare.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mike Sands. I'd like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. There is much in this report to commend. I'm pleased to see that the Higham Park Pavilion is to be rebuilt. I know that local residents and park users hope that the thatched roof can be replaced for something similar to preserve the special style of the building. I hope the building can then be used for a constructive purpose, perhaps a cafe. It would be great to be able to invest in that park in a way that would actually benefit its hundreds of regular users. I would certainly support upgrades of the council's IT and hope that this improvement will filter through to councillors eventually. I'm keen to see the council looking towards the future and becoming more resilient. Good quality cycle routes are also something that I and my colleagues would support. Several of the town's funds projects appear to be just what the city needs: a digital hub, improvements to neighbourhood shopping centres, equipment and improvements for the halls, and the long-awaited redevelopment of the Undercroft. All seem to be projects absolutely worthy of support. Green councillors are also very pleased that the council has finally taken note of the pleas of the ward councillors over the last few years to resurface the play area at West End Street. As you may all know, the park has been uncared for and dangerous for a number of years, and Green councillors have long campaigned for some improvements. I hope that improvements to other parks, such as those at Dorrow Place and Ely Street, will follow soon, as the people living in those communities deserve decent play areas. Finally, it will come as no surprise that the Green Group is not willing to support the project misleadingly described as tennis court improvements. We have, time and again, made very clear our opposition to the destruction of what we believe are the only remaining public grass tennis courts in the city, and that is something that we will not be voting for. I am, once again, extremely disappointed with what appears to be the childishness of the Cabinet trying to sneakily slip this past council and to confuse the issue by lumping it in with play parks. For the sake of accountability and transparency, this needs to be clearly stated so residents can see that Labour councillors are voting for a project that residents are so vehemently opposed to. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It is important that the Higham Park Pavilion is rebuilt following the tragic fire, and I'm delighted to see this being provided for. On the IT, we're now beyond the reasonable lifespan of the council's current desktop IT equipment, and this provision is sensible. Moving away from desktop PCs to laptops means that the council can respond quickly to any changes that require staff to work outside of City Hall for a prolonged period of time, such as, dare I say it, future pandemic. Tourism will be an important part of the post-COVID regeneration, so I'm pleased to see these modest costs to help improve the resources in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, other councillors who've indicated. Councillor Carlow.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I intend abstaining on this item because it includes an extra £67,000 for all-weather courts at Higham Park at a time when poverty is widespread and growing in Norwich. Since 2012, the City Council has probably spent £half to £750,000 on 12 all-weather courts, tennis courts, for management by Norwich Parks Tennis. With responsibility for spending public money, the Council ought to review the extent to which Norwich Parks Tennis contributes to reducing inequalities before awarding a £400,000 contract for a further 5 all-weather courts. This doesn't seem to have been done. Councillor Packer offered to walk me around Norwich, presumably to show me low-income areas. In actual fact, I had first-hand experience of poverty in my formative years, having grown up in a single-parent, low-income household in the 1960s and 70s. When my parents divorced, my mother, 2 sisters and I became homeless, and we moved to a hard-to-heat council house. We had one income from my mum's low-paid job in the NHS. If my mum had a spare £35, it went towards basic necessities such as heating bills, or, because charity shops were rare then, towards shoes and winter coats, and certainly not luxuries such as tennis membership. This is why I say from experience that low-income households are unlikely to join Norwich Park's tennis at £35 per household per year, and why capital funding for Hayham Park should be diverted to much-needed capital projects in wards where high levels of hardship exist.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to contribute? Councillor Driver.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Just on the last point Councillor Carlo talking about, can I ask the Cabinet member the £67,000? I believe that some of that money is spent on tennis courts in Lakenham. Is this right that the Green Party are against the residents in Lakenham, which are crying out for these tennis courts to be put up? And so we can actually play there. Are they against the ones in Lakenham as well? This is part of the money for the parks to go on Hayham Park and Lakenham as well. Can I ask the Cabinet member, am I correct in that?
Thank you very much. Councillor Driver. Councillor Joseph.
I haven't indicated, Lord Mayor.
Sorry?
I haven't indicated to speak, Lord Mayor.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, well. No, my apologies. Councillor Bergline.
Just to respond to Councillor Driver, Councillor Carlo was speaking of the Hayham Park part of it. Just because you lump it together with another good bit doesn't make it right, yeah. But I'd like to speak to the Western Street Park bit. I'm obviously delighted to find out that finally, after years of campaigning, the children and youth around Western Street will get a new basketball court and play equipment. After all, this has been one of the Green Group's budget amendments previously, which shows you how important it is to us. But I have to be honest that the way this is sneaked into a budget line here leaves a sour taste. There are many people who have a stake in this play park and who have campaigned for years for this to happen. You may remember the little boy and his family who came to full council and presented a petition for their play park to be renewed. The nearby Nelson Infant School supported the campaign, and many of the school children and parents have signed the petition. I went from door to door to get more signatures. The area has also got a very active residents association. We all would have very much liked to be involved in this bit and get information about the progress. I really hope going forward there is flexibility in involving the community, all those people who have campaigned for this over years, and making these shared plans and a shared vision, not something the council just decides for residents. But I'm nevertheless very happy for this funding to have come through, and maybe I will be able to leave my pack of plasters at home soon, because there will be no more grey sneeze from the old surface.
Thank you. Any other councillors indicate? Councillor Packer.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think I'd start by sort of wheeling out some of the references that I've made at previous meetings, particularly the last Cabinet meeting, I believe it was, where Councillor Carlo was asking questions about Hayham Park. And when I went through a fairly comprehensive list of expenditure and investments that we are continuing to make in our parks, and those are parks across our city for everybody. And just to clarify, Councillor Carlo, my offer at the last meeting was to walk you around your ward to see areas of deprivation. Now, I'd add to that as well, Councillor Carlo, that you speak about tennis membership being a luxury. Yet the community group that you've been supporting throughout the Hayham Park matter were looking at a membership fee of £60, and it wasn't clear whether that was £60 per person or per household. Now, the Norwich Park's tennis is £35 per household. So I think that's far better value for money than £60 possibly per individual. I think also for Councillor Bergline, thank you for your comments. What I would suggest is that we are working with our residents' associations very closely like we do with all of our community groups, and we will continue to do that, and we will continue to invest in what are incredibly valuable and recognised green parks and open spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Packer. Any other councillors wish to indicate? No, I can't see any.
Oh,
okay. Oh, have I missed one?
Sorry, Lord Mayor.
Sorry, right, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to Councillor Driver, yes, the funding that we've got is committed, particularly the external funding for the Norwich Park's tennis expansion is committed for both Hyam Park and Lakenham Rec. And it always seems to me to be a bit strange that Lakenham Rec seems to be left off the questions that we've had recently from opposition councillors about this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Packer. And they're your own words, not be put into you by the person behind you. Very good. Thank you. Any others wish to indicate? No? Okay. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I'm surely only the Green Group can complain about the fact that we're actually improving play equipment. And for the idea that somehow we have smuggled the tennis courts issue, it's just patent nonsense. It was discussed at the last cabinet meeting, and I can't even remember how many times we have discussed it at committee meetings, cabinet meetings, and at full council meetings. So the idea that we somehow smuggled this through is absolute nonsense. And of course, Councillor Driver is absolutely right. This does include Lakenham. As do Councillor Carlo, well, yes, I had a hard upbringing as well. I was brought up in a council estate, so, you know, there's quite a few members of this council know about poverty childhood, not just you.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? No. Okay. Abstentions? Okay. In favour? Thank you. That's been carried. Okay, moving on to item 7, appointment of a deputy monitoring officer. I call upon Councillor Kendrick to move item 7.
This is fairly self-explanatory. I think you would accept, Lord Mayor. This is to remove Anton Ball and Bob Cronk from being deputy monitoring officers and to replace them with Graham Nelson as the deputy monitoring officer. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Stootley to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Formally seconded.
Thank you. I'd like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, as Councillor Kendrick said, this is fairly self-explanatory. I think that the appointment of the member of the corporate leadership team to this post of Deputy Monitoring Officer will ensure that the holder has valuable knowledge regarding the workings of the Council, and that will ensure that advice that can be given on complex issues where there are potential conflicts of interest with NP law as the Council's current principal source of legal advice. On the other hand, I would stress that the monitoring officer's independence from the Council's leadership team is to be highly valued. That independence is vital in order to provide a disinterested source of legal advice for councillors and a point of contact for complaints. Therefore, while Green Party councillors will be supporting this particular appointment, I would also stress that the independence of the monitoring officer and any who take on that role is paramount, as is legal expertise. And I hope that this will be taken into consideration for future appointments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm delighted to endorse the appointment of Graham Nelson and have every confidence in him carrying out this role as necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors indicate wish to contribute? Okay, well, happy with that. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to respond?
Nothing to add.
Thank you. I will now move to the vote. All those against? Abstentions? In favour? Thank you. That's carried. Item 8, Interim Parliamentary Polling District and Places Review 2020. This report can be found in your supplementary agenda pack, which is available on the Council's website. I call upon Councillor Giles to move item 8.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll be brief. Just to set out the context of this, there was obviously a City Council ward boundary review prior to the all-up elections in 2019. Subsequent to that, there was a polling district and polling station review, which should have been in place for the City Council elections that were due for May 2020. They obviously didn't take place, so they're happening as dual elections next May with the 2021 County Council elections. A combination of the dual or triple nature of the elections next year and the COVID pandemic necessitated the need for another review of polling stations. Our Democratic Services team worked incredibly hard on this, and I thank them for all their fantastic work. A cross-party working group of councillors was set up to be consulted to advise and amend this scheme accordingly, and this scheme was come up with. I hope you're able to support this tonight. I won't go through it in detail, it's set out in the report. I'm happy to take any questions either tonight or outside the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kendrick, would you like to second the item?
I shall be even briefer. I formally second and reserve the right to reply.
Thank you. I'd like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Carlow.
Thank you. I'll be brief. I'd just like to add my warm thanks to the Democratic Services team for their hard work, and also for listening carefully to the suggestions of the committee. So thank you very much indeed. I'm sure next year will work well.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As Councillor Giles has already said, members met earlier this month for a detailed discussion of the proposals at a working party. There are clearly some concerns raised about the location of some of the polling stations, and the postponement of the new county boundaries, which could have returned coterminosity, has led to some specific challenges around where people vote this coming year. But we mustn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Whilst outside the scope of this report, the Council's decision to promote postal votes is highly welcome. We do not share the view of the current President of the USA, however, when it comes to postal votes. They are safe and secure, and members of the public should feel confident in applying for one and then voting by post. I've been given assurance by the elections team that they can cope with applications from all voters, postal vote applications from all voters, and process the votes coming back up till 10 PM on polling day. Postal votes can, of course, be put in the post, but also handed in at City Hall or a polling station, whatever the voter feels most comfortable with, taking COVID-19 into account. Having said all of that, delighted to support the report today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors indicate that they'd like to contribute? No? Okay. Councillor Giles, would you like to respond?
Just to quickly echo what Councillor Wright said, to thank officers for all the work they're doing on getting as many voters signed up on postal votes as possible, and of course also ensuring that polling stations are COVID secure for those who do go to vote on the day. So thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? Okay. Abstentions? All those in favour? Councillor Kendrick, your video's off. You put your get back on there. Yep, thank you. That's carried. Thank you. Right, we move to item 9A, the motion declaring a food poverty. Please bear with us while officers remove members from the meeting who have declared a pecuniary interest and have not requested a dispensation. Okay, thank you. I call upon Councillor Davis to move motion 9A.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just for clarity, this is declaring a poverty emergency. This motion declaring a poverty emergency has two purposes. Firstly, it reaffirms our practical commitment to recovery planning locally, in which wealth, power and opportunity are extended throughout our community. And secondly, it aims to create national, holistic, strategic change by putting pressure on the government to fix the broken capitalist democracy which we're all living under, where jobs and billion-pound contracts to your mates takes priority over feeding hungry kids. To date, the government has spent £12 billion on a test and trace system which Boris Johnson promised would move the country forward and stop the economy crumbling. The Chancellor said it would enable people to carry on with their normal lives. However, life is anything but normal for many people. Whether you're one of the 3 million people excluded by the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme, have found yourself unemployed for the first time and hit with the reality of a broken social security system, are struggling to pay high rent to a private landlord, are not entitled to support for mortgage interest, which is now via a Serco loan, or are bogusly self-employed, you have seen your basic human rights stripped under COVID. But if you were already subject to the bedroom tax on a 0 hours contract, were struggling to put food on the table and heat your home, have a disability or care for someone who does, you are used to this battle. Your rights have systematically been stripped away over the last decade of unnecessary austerity. Returning to normal is not the paradise the Chancellor seems to think it is for many. And if you're a woman, congratulations. You're working for the rest of the financial year for free in comparison to your male counterparts. It's 50 years since the Equal Pay Act, and under this government, we are all being dragged backwards. We will never get out of this situation unless the government steps up and invests in jobs for the future, education and training, and green technology. And if they keep underfunding councils to the point of bankruptcy, this country will simply not function. Councils have been at the forefront of the COVID crisis, whether that is helping people to access food, life-saving medication, providing debt and benefits advice, and administering grants to individuals, businesses and organisations, whilst at the same time maintaining the expected frontline services with little more than empty promises coming from the government and massive losses to income. To date, councils across England, which run thousands of services, have received £4.6 billion in emergency funding from the government. Serco have received £12 billion for a failed track and trace service. One service, not thousands. And there is talk of pumping another £10 billion into this. Other countries with much more effective systems haven't wasted money like this. This money should be going into the infrastructure needed to build back better, if indeed that is what the Tories want to do. So future generations can live in a country with opportunities for all, decent jobs, a fair welfare system, a functioning NHS, and real sustainable development, not a tokenistic scrapping of petrol cars in 2030 while still spending extortionate amounts on road building and destroying the environment. So I call on you tonight to back this poverty emergency, to encourage other councils to follow in our footsteps, to put pressure on the government to invest in people and planet, not private profiteering, and to continue pushing for the change we all need and we all deserve. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. I call upon Councillor Huntley to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In the 1920s, Clement Attlee, later Labour's Prime Minister, was a social worker in the East End of London. The Oxford graduate, from a comfortable middle-class background, came face to face with the everyday realities of ubiquitous, inescapable poverty. He recalled leaving work one day, saying he was going home to see what there was for tea. A young girl replied that she was going home to see if there was any tea. Almost a century later, deprivation, want, and poverty are not only with us, but are growing. The effects of poverty are far-reaching. The 2019-2020 Poverty Report by the Joseph Rendry Foundation identified 14 million people currently living in poverty in the UK. Between April 2019 and March 2020, food banks distributed a record 1.9 million emergency food supplies. It's expected there will be an increase of over 60% in usage by the end of this year, and the Trestle Trust estimate that in the forthcoming winter period, there will be 6 emergency food parcels given out every minute. Poverty in all its forms, in the 5th wealthiest country in the world, is a blight of deprivation, one that results from structural inequality, and the levels of poverty that are currently affecting the lives of so many must be recognised as constituting an emergency. This motion is urgent and important, and I call upon all councillors to offer their support.
Thank you. I'd like to invite group spokespersons now. Councillor Schmier.
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor, and thank you very much, Councillors Davis and Huntley, for bringing this motion to us. Tackling poverty and reducing inequalities are key goals of the Green Group too. Cuts to the welfare system have pushed vulnerable into penury and debt, and fragmented, divided, and polarised our society. The extreme poverty that we sadly see in our society on the streets of this city and elsewhere is a moral blotch which stains the conscience of our nation. And there is a human dimension to this economic iniquity. In England, there has been a systematic relationship between deprivation and life expectancy, with males living in the least deprived areas at birth expecting to live 9.4 years less than males in the wealthiest areas. For females, the gap between rich and poor is 7.4 years. This is starkly illustrated if you were to take the Jubilee line from affluent Westminster to post-industrial Canning Town in London. Each stop of this 8-stop journey represents a drop of approximately a year in average lifespans. And this is not unique to London. In Glasgow, the drop is even more stark. Average life expectancy falls by 2 years for men and 1.2 years for women for each station on the railway line between Jordan Hill in the more affluent West End and Brigton in the city's deprived East End. But this is nothing new. It is sadly the result of decades of failure to invest in the social infrastructure, especially among our most deprived communities in our post-industrial cities. Instead, a neoliberal economic orthodoxy has prevailed, even if some governments have attempted to implement them with a more human face. The 5 giant evils of want, ignorance, squalor, disease and idleness that were identified by Beveridge 80 years or so ago are still with us. But there is an alternative, and there clearly is money to spend to remedy this. In the last few months, the government has committed £500 million of lost tax revenue on a stamp duty holiday subsidising landlords to expand their property portfolios. £500 million subsidising the lunches of middle class people through the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Not to mention white elephants initiated by previous governments, 90 billion for HS2 and an eye-watering 200 billion for Trident replacement. That money could and should have been used supporting the poorest in our society through means such as universal basic income, which would have dealt and addressed some of the causes of the high income inequalities in our country. This is going to be imperative going forward. Those in their 20s and 30s today are already set to become the first generation that is poorer than its parents for well over a century. Something set to be exacerbated as a result of the pandemic unless we do have that change in socioeconomic policies. While the elderly have suffered the most when it comes to the pandemic's impact on health, young people have suffered the worst economic effects of the crisis. Unemployment rates have risen by the most among younger generations, while income rates have declined. And COVID has particularly impacted those at the bottom of the pay scale or working in the gig economy. Britain already has some of the highest rates of income inequality in Western Europe, higher than our neighbours such as Germany or France, and considerably higher than our Scandinavian countries. But income isn't the only determinant of inequality. We also have growing levels of inequality based on the unprecedented transfer of power and resources from labour to capital in the last decade. In that time, higher living costs and inflation rates have coincided with limited, if any, pay rises, meaning that wages have largely stagnated. This is set to get a lot worse if, as it's been reported today, the Chancellor cancels the proposed 5.6% rise in the national living wage for 2 million of the country's poorest paid workers. I am pleased that this motion attempts to redress some of the most pressing socioeconomic ills afflicting our nation and seeks the very noble goal of creating a lasting legacy of change where poverty is not inevitable in our society and where fairer, greener and stronger communities can emerge. I look forward to supporting this motion. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ackroyd.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. During the pandemic, we've heard countless stories from people who faced horrendous choices, such as between affording food or falling behind on rent. The pandemic has hit the lowest income and no income families hardest. The Resolution Foundation recently found that 54% of the lowest income families have needed to borrow to pay for necessities during the pandemic. By August, 6 million people had fallen behind on at least one household bill, and the evidence is that later lockdowns will have amplified the problem. Rental arrears increased dramatically. Tragically, it's families with children who are often worst affected. For many, this will be a frightening Christmas. The charity Step Change estimates the pandemic has led to 2.87 million people being at high risk of long-term debt. The human cost of problem debt is high and goes beyond simple lack of resources. Worry and stress in households can be debilitating and has long-term mental health consequences, especially for children. The pandemic has shown that even for those in work, the vast majority of people in this country are just 2 paychecks away from not being able to pay the bills. This should be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity both to combat looming mass unemployment and to reshape the economy on more environmental lines. In June, Council debated its blueprint for recovery. Today, paragraph 4 of this motion calls on the government to address many much-needed issues, amongst other things calling for the implementation of a statutory real living wage. Importantly, this would be paid to those over 18 and is currently voluntarily paid by nearly 7,000 UK businesses who believe their staff deserve a wage which meets everyday needs, more or less. Longer term, Council passed a motion in July calling on the government to launch a universal basic income pilot in the city as a support to recovery. Members of Parliament from all parties have been keen to sing the praises of our key workers during this crisis, but now have to back this with policy intervention. A large proportion of care workers, NHS staff, delivery drivers, refuse collectors and supermarket staff are on low or minimum wages, and many are on 0-hour contracts. These workers, dubbed heroes, have received no pay increases and may well not do so. Now they face an enormous debt burden. Efforts should be made and plans laid for better paid and more secure jobs, because working in the gig economy keeps people poor. So does having to pay too much for a rented home. I hope I'm not straying too far from the main thrust of this motion if I mention specifically the care system. We currently have a crisis in the care sector, which was overstretched before the pandemic and now finds itself in a worse plight. Almost 3/4 of frontline care workers in England are earning below the real living wage. Over the last decade, the quality and provision of care, as well as funding and recruitment levels, have all declined. It shouldn't have taken a pandemic to shine a spotlight on the struggles of our country's unpaid carers. According to a recent Carers UK report, over 55% of unpaid carers currently feel overwhelmed by their caring responsibilities, and 81% are spending more money during the coronavirus outbreak. And the struggles didn't just start in March this year. I know that unpaid carers bore the brunt of austerity following the last recession. And in 2016, research from the New Policy Institute exposed that 1.2 million working age carers were living in poverty. The report from the UK Women's Budget Group Commission makes the point that rather than having a care system reflecting the country's overall prosperity, successive governments have focused on containing public expenditure on both child and adult care. As a result, UK parents pay the highest childcare costs in Europe, and 1.4 million older people have unmet care needs. Although we're prepared to entrust our young and old to them, most of those working in child and adult care are classified as unskilled, given minimal training, often on 0 hours contracts with little or no prospects for promotion. The report outlines the case for investment in care as a better post-pandemic economic stimulus than investment in construction. Back to the motion before us. We fully support all aspects of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we move to other councillors who have indicated. Councillor Brochette-Colton.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would encourage all councillors to vote for this motion, which declares a poverty emergency. Like all councillors in this chamber, in just 6 months, I've been finding more and more cases of our residents that are suffering from poverty. When we started to make the free packed lunches at the Silver Road Community Centre in the summer, we had only a few families coming in, but we could see there was a need for this and how hard it was for families to survive without help during the holidays. In October half term, we had the food bank open and found not only were some families having our packed lunches delivered, but also they're having a food parcel delivered too. It isn't just the fact that the parents not have the money to buy food, but also the terrible burden and constant anxiety of not being able to provide for their families as they previously have been used to, and through no fault of their own. Let me give you an example. One of the families who used our free packed lunches service said she had an autistic child, and when we came regularly bringing her daughter's lunch, she had waited for us at a certain time, and it helped how the family ran. Also, she said that when she came to get a food parcel, she didn't feel as if she was being judged, but that the group at Silver Road were kind and friendly towards her. I had the mother of another child call me up, a mother of another family, call me up asking for a food parcel, and that she only had £6 in her account. How awful is that for a mother to have to admit she has so little in her account? We managed to give her food for her children and put her in touch with the Norfolk assessment scheme. Another family came to our food bank who were waiting for benefits to come in, and they had their young son with them. The young son said to his mother, "Why are we getting so much food, Mum, when we have no money?" This did quite shock me, and the mother just explained that the food bank The food from the food bank was free. How do you make a child understand this, and why should they have to understand this when we're supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world? I'm also a Norfolk County councillor too, and as a Norfolk County councillor over the last lockdown, I've worked with the Labour team in a subgroup, and we've been able to win the extra expenses to pay for fair share to bring food that we could then take around the different food banks around Norfolk. We also set up so there was a £3,000 balance with the Norfolk County councillors to be able to give residents we felt needed sums of money up to £30. This was with the Norfolk Assistance Scheme too. We gave them their details, and the Norfolk Assistance Scheme then got in touch with them with some great results for the resident, such as helping them pay off their arrears of gas and electric. Being in debt doesn't have to be thousands of pounds. A couple of hundred will make your mental health go down to zero. The situation that families are in now is horrendous, and all we can do is to support them. But it shouldn't just be as individuals or voluntary community groups doing what a proper social security system should be doing if it hadn't been deliberately destroyed by this Tory government. So in the meantime, let's keep doing good work where we can, but also declare a poverty emergency tonight to turn the spotlight on this terrible issue once again. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I too commend this motion. Food poverty and the growth of food banks has increasingly become an issue over the past 10 years of Tory government austerity. The COVID pandemic has put this under a spotlight, and I'm sure every councillor has evidence and anecdotal tales of food bank activity and the distribution of food parcels across their ward. I'd like to commend the work of Labour's Food Out Friday, alluded to by Councillor Brochett-Colton, and that of Connecting Bowthorpe, a local organisation in my own ward throughout this period. It is interesting to note the growing groundswell of support for a universal basic income. Norwich has been mooted as a trial region for this in the UK. UBI has achieved a very positive response in publications as diverse as New Statesman, The Guardian, National Geographic, and even CNN News. The time has come for a universal basic income. This would mean no longer would we have to talk about food or a poverty emergency. In the meantime, however, motions such as declaring a poverty emergency are a necessity, putting a spotlight on the effects of poverty in our society. So again, I commend and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to indicate, contribute? Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
You switched your video off, Councillor Maxwell.
Right. I'm having trouble. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm having trouble getting it back.
Okay.
But if I could just speak.
Yes, that's okay.
It's pitch as well, because I'm almost in tears here. This is taking me back 70 years to when I started school. I was lucky, I had a pair of shoes. And it was 4 years after the war. I lived in a poor part of Liverpool, and I went to school with people who only had one meal a day. And that meal was probably just sandwiches. I was lucky. We had 2 meals. I didn't know that people had breakfast till I was about 6. And I do, I'm glad you can't see me, because this has really brought it home to me. If we don't do something, I know all the people I went to school with, all I started with, they struggled. Some of them got on. Very, very few of them got work. We're going back to war, and this is what we don't want to do. But thank you for listening.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to indicate, contribute? Okay. Councillor Davis, would you like to respond?
Thank you. Yes, thank you for your comments tonight. I think we're all in agreement about how terrible things are at the moment. And well, you know, can we change them? I don't know. We can put pressure on the government to try, and I think really that's all we can do at the moment. But we definitely need to be trying to do something, because this is getting worse for the people of Norwich. We've got 6.2% unemployment now. It was just over 2% a couple of years ago. So, you know, this is not getting any better. And until the government step up and start investing in education and jobs for the future, we're not going to see this getting any better. So thank you all so much for your comments tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote. All those against? No. Abstentions? No. All those in favour? Carried. It's unanimous. Thank you. We'll now readmit members who have declared an interest in this item before moving to the next item. Okay. Right. Motion 9B, transitioning to a more sustainable Norwich economy. An amendment to motion 9B has been received from Councillor Maguire, which has been circulated. Councillor Osborne has indicated that he is willing to accept this amendment. If no other member objects, the amendment will become part of the substantive motion. I will ask officers to put the first set of amendments on the screen for a short period of time to ensure members are clear on this. The amendments are in bold text. Can I ask you to remain muted while this is on the screen, as no debate can take place while as members won't be able to be seen. Okay, thank you. As no members have objected, I think that's the case. Yep, that's agreed. Another amendment to item 9B has been received from Councillor Maguire, which has been circulated. Councillor Osborne has indicated that he is not willing to accept this amendment. It will therefore be dealt with in the usual way after the substantive motion has been moved and seconded. I'll ask officers to put this amendment on the screen for a short period of time to ensure members are clear on this. Can I ask you to remain muted while this is on the screen, as no debate should take place as members won't be seen. Again, the amendments are in bold text. Okay. Right. Thank you. Right. I call upon Councillor Osborne to move motion 9B as amended.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In a few years' time, we could have a Norwich in which everyone has a secure and a warm home. No one will be hungry because there is well-paid and meaningful work for all those who want it. Those who aren't in employment or who want a change in career will have access to training and education within their communities as well as in formal settings. Everything that is needed on a daily basis, schools, work, local shops, will be no more than 15 minutes walk from your home, and there will be reliable and affordable public transport to go further afield. Everyone will have access to green spaces for recreation or for growing food. Children will be able to play in the streets. It will be a dynamic city too, with self-starting local businesses running on clean energy. And local people, especially those who have been historically most vulnerable and most excluded, will have a direct say in the governance of their community. This might sound far-fetched when you look at the economy that we are in today, and some of the comments that were made in the debate on the poverty emergency motion earlier showcase that. There's been a 350% increase in homelessness in the last decade in Norwich. Over the next 15 to 16 years, more than 1 in 3 households will be in need of affordable housing in our city. The number of people claiming universal credit has soared, and as have food bank referrals. Young people like myself are facing very little in the way of job options, and more than half of under 25s in the region say that their job prospects are average or poor. Meanwhile, the Black Lives Matter protests have highlighted the atrocious and the daily ways in which many people whose ancestors were enslaved or colonized are still suffering. And throughout all of this, the pursuit of economic growth fueled by unsustainable and inefficient resource use has caused catastrophic damage to our environment. 40% of vertebrate animals and 1 in 5 plant species are threatened with extinction in Britain. The accelerating climate crisis could cause dire food shortages as well as flooding huge swathes of Norfolk, including in Norwich. The coronavirus pandemic has exacerbated many of these inequalities. The shock to the economy could worsen the inequality and the planet-trashing trajectory of recent decades. After a brief dip, carbon emissions are soaring once again, and while many now face harsher poverty and job losses, the super rich are profiting, which is simply obscene. Yet the pandemic has also brought about greater demands for positive change. After the experience of the first lockdown, people from all walks of life expressed a desire for a fairer, kinder, greener, and more connected Britain. That's according to the Reset inquiry carried out by the all-party parliamentary group on a Green New Deal. And that work highlighted that we are at a turning point. Do we want a future of more poverty, continued racism, climate breakdown, and unaccountable government? Or how can we get to a more positive future, one that we so desperately need? This Green Party motion proposes a way forward and calls for a just transition to a fairer and more regenerative society. It recognises that Norwich City Council is already acting through the 2040 vision and the corporate priorities of people living well, great neighbourhoods, housing and environment, and an inclusive economy. But meeting the challenges of the climate and the biodiversity emergency and the appalling crises of poverty and discrimination, which are all linked, requires a more urgent and crucially a much broader approach, including from regional bodies such as the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership. And there's already a lot of grassroots urgency. This motion was developed together with conversations with the Norwich District Trades Council and other workers' representatives groups. There's a clear need for a coordinated effort to kickstart a regenerative economy, one that will at the same time reduce carbon emissions and restore biodiversity. That would mean investing in those things that we need to meet the basic requirements of life, things like affordable, climate-resilient homes, clean energy such as solar, wind, and green hydrogen, decent public transport, circular, waste-free industry, and local sustainable food. And there are many jobs in these areas if we invest in them. This proposal would also ensure opportunities for training for people working currently in industries that cannot be sustained in a time of COVID and climate change, such as aviation or the building of new roads, or that cannot be sustained in the way that they currently operate. And of course, there would be a greater focus on addressing areas of inequality in society due to race, disability, gender, or sexuality. Crucially, the design of this future must be led by those who will be most affected. For example, the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, that's a public body that administers, a powerful body that administers millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, but which has almost always holds its meetings behind closed doors, must have union representation on its board. Going further, A regional citizens' assembly would bring together people from all walks of life in a democratically representative forum to discuss and to come up with plans for the regional economy. This is a tried and tested and simple way of finding common solutions for difficult problems, and the history of citizens' assemblies shows that they tend to be progressive and to come up with solutions that actually work. And I want to stress that participants would be remunerated for their time so that we can make sure that it's truly representative. So to sum up, these are difficult and frightening times for a lot of people. We need change now. The current economy and the political system are not working for the majority of people or for our planet. We cannot afford to go back to business as usual. We need a change in approach. This motion for a just transition for the Norwich economy sets out a vision for a better shared future, and I hope that many people will join in supporting it.
Thank you. Call upon Councillor Joseph to second the item.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In early 1984, the Conservative government of Margaret Thatcher announced plans to close 20 coal pits, and ultimately 115 pits were closed under her watch. Her decision decimated communities long reliant on mines as a source of income. I've seen this firsthand. My mother's family are from a small mining village in South Yorkshire that, like many others, has yet to fully recover from the effects of Thatcher's policies. And yet, speaking today, we're at another crossroads. Inequality and poverty are increasing rapidly, and climate change threatens our very existence. We desperately need to work towards a fairer, greener Britain to combat these crises. However, unless we plan for a just transition into this new status quo, drastic changes to single industry communities will be devastating. Social movements have long recognised the interrelationship between economic and climate justice for years. For example, in France, the Yellow Vest movement has demanded social justice in the transition to a low-carbon economy. We must ensure that, unlike the draconian and inhumane measures Thatcher implemented, no worker, indeed no individual, is left behind in this transition to a fairer, greener economy. This is why I'm delighted to second this green motion calling for a just transition to a fairer, kinder and greener Britain. It aims to tackle the three emergencies we are facing. The poverty emergency, as more and more people plunge into inescapable poverty in the UK. The climate and biodiversity emergency, the effects of which will adversely affect the most vulnerable in society. And lastly, the public health emergency we are facing under COVID, which again has adversely affected the most vulnerable in society. It's clear from these emergencies that our current economic system isn't working. A just transition would provide more than just work. It would ensure people have a standard of living that they truly deserve. It would offer support to groups commonly marginalised in society, ensuring that no one is forgotten in our move forwards. It would create jobs in clean energy and the waste-free industry, to name a few, and would provide opportunities for retraining to those currently working in industries that cannot be sustained if we are to combat the emergencies we are facing. Let's be clear here, it's not about destroying livelihoods or fighting innovation, it's about ensuring that we come together as a society to fight for a better future for all of us. I hope that many of you here tonight will join me in supporting this just transition.
Thank you. Right, I'd like to call upon Councillor Maguire to move the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, for this opportunity to amend the motion. We, of course, welcome the keen support that the Green Party wish to give this Labour administration in all that we're doing to protect and improve the environment, whilst being mindful of the social and economic needs of all of our citizens. According to government statistics, Norwich per capita emissions have fallen 48.5% over the last 15 years. And as we're near halfway, we're entering the hardest part of our carbon reduction journey as we progress towards neutrality. Our neutrality, however, can't be delivered in isolation and without regional, national consensus. That's why most of the proposed amendments, and where there is disagreement, relate to amendments to Resolution 1. And I propose those amendments, for three main reasons. First, the City Council are grateful to all the help, data and advice that we receive from the world-leading Tyndall Centre at UEA. They continue to communicate hope and scientific facts across the world. They unite communities to take action and make behavioural changes needed to tackle this global challenge. Their forecasting tools enable real progress to be made in national policy development. Now, the tool referred to in the motion highlights the fact that the carbon budget of Norwich is largely dependent upon national government policy, such as the recent announcements in regards to the electrification of transport or a move to low carbon power generation across the country. Second, there are also a range of other scientific bodies that have been advising the government on national policy. And while I'm sure they make similar calculations, their advice is tempered by the political outlook of the current government and is formulated into action by a range of national and regional initiatives. This inevitably affects Norwich City Council and our strategy for achieving the targets that we've set ourselves. This includes our becoming a carbon neutral institution by 2030 and a carbon neutral city by 2050. Third, if we in Norwich were able to follow this linear fast track, we would go out to sync with other bodies, institutions and industries, both locally, nationally and internationally. Further, Lord Mayor, in the real world, any dreams and wishes remain just that without a strategy, the financial tools and a set of deliverable actions. For Norwich City Council, this Labour administration relies on partnership working. The LEP, with its 16 local authorities, its commercial, industrial, educational and other partners work with us and help us to move further forward. Unilateral action would lose not only their goodwill, but also their practical and financial help in achieving our laudable targets. So Norwich will become carbon neutral, but only if we keep working with our critical partners, harnessing their crucial additional resources and their valuable funding, which makes our interventions actually deliver on this target locally and in a way that is just. We will not do so by forcing targets onto partners who are unable or are unwilling to accept
wind up
them.
now, please.
However, we can, as always, foster the relationships, encourage open dialogue and help them to understand and hopefully change their perspectives, concerns and views over time. These amendments will ensure this path to success will be both maintained and enhanced. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stannard, to second the amendment.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to second this amendment. We propose the amendments in order to bring the motion into the real world of actual practical steps. We're working hard to make this city carbon neutral. We're mindful of the reality of partnership working and accessing the finances to enable the required change to happen. I would wish to thank and commend the Tyndall Centre at UEA. Their tool recommends that Norwich promote the low carbon alternatives locally and, where possible, influence the national or regional policy on the issue. In many respects, this influence work has been ongoing for numerous years and with a variety of different levels of government across various political administrations. Indeed, in many ways, this agenda was driven by the Labour administration. It's important to understand that the 12.7% carbon reduction figure to which the original motion refers goes on to say that these annual reductions in emissions require national as well as local action and should be part of a wider collaboration. My colleague, Councillor Maguire, has already emphasised the central role of partnership working in tackling climate change. As a council, we are acutely aware of the variety of targets from the various institutions of Norwich, Norfolk and beyond. Some, sadly, are still formulating or deciding upon their response. However, as has been said, all the evidence points towards delivering in partnership if we are to deliver success, both nationally and more locally. We need to establish a common consensus together and help create a shared vision of the future. Presently, this is 2050. Lord Mayor, we cannot talk about the environment and the climate emergency without considering equity and fairness. And I'm sure the Green Party are aware that sustainability, if it is truly so, must be economic and social as well as environmental. If we focus our energies on one to the detriment of the others, we will fail. In the name of all our citizens, and not just those living in nice areas cushioned from poverty and deprivation, we must devote our resources fairly. One other amendment that we would wish to make refers to the insertion of, quote, and government, unquote, in point 2 of the resolution. The Green Party opposite do not want this, and I'm not sure why. Either they don't understand the pivotal role of central government in addressing our climate emergency, or even worse, they do recognise it, but once again, seek to fail inactively doing anything about climate change. Does the Green Party find it easier to bleat on the sidelines than actually work practically and collaboratively to address this planet-threatening phenomenon? Just to make it clear, we cannot achieve carbon neutrality across the city without the powers and funding that only central government can give, along with their ability to coordinate at national and international level. And it's important that this amendment is passed so that the proposal reflects that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other councillors who've indicated want to contribute? Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just to pick up on Councillor Stannard's last point first about the inserting and government. The reason why it's not appropriate to insert it there is because that specific point is asking the new Anglia LEP to carry out an action. It's not anything to do with the government or within the government's power. And as Councillor Stannard and Maguire will know, I fully support actions to lobby the government for further action on the climate emergency, as I have asked a number of questions about that previously and have asked for reports from cabinet members regarding that. To address Councillor Maguire's other points, first of all, I would clarify that the 48% reduction in per capita emissions that Councillor Maguire references is when you take out emissions from shipping, aviation, and production and consumption. That's everything that people in Norwich buy that's being produced elsewhere. Also, a lot of that is due to the decarbonisation of the grid as we've moved away from coal onto gas, which is quite an easy win. And so that trajectory is likely to slow. It's going to be much harder to carry on. I think also there's a bit of inconsistency in what the Labour amendment is. They refer to the Tyndall Centre, advice from the Tyndall Centre and the Government's Committee on Climate Change. Those bodies advocate quite different things. The Committee on Climate Change recommends a net zero target of 2050, and net zero in this case means relying on unproven technologies that don't exist yet, and even if they did exist would require extracting huge amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So basically what that's saying is we'll carry on polluting now in the hope that somehow maybe we'll clear it up later, but we don't really know how. To address Councillor Maguire's point about not being in sync with the government, I'm really surprised actually to hear that from a Labour councillor who should be, I thought, criticising or at least pushing the government and other partners to be really taking a bit more of a stand on the climate emergency. That was in the Labour Party manifesto at the last general election. I think that we have to be pushing for a greater urgency on the climate emergency, and I don't see that there's any reason for this council not to acknowledge the science-based targets set by the Tyndall Centre. That's Councillor Stannard talks about bringing this motion into the real world. Those targets are based on physics and a carbon budget. That's listening to the science, which is what the school strikers and other young people are calling for. So I think that we need to be listening to the science, and as other councils have done, looking at examples from Nottingham, for example, or Bristol, which was the first council to declare a climate emergency. That was, was that unilateral action at the time, declaring a climate emergency? Is it unilateral action to declare a poverty emergency? I think that, that there is scope to actually
start winding up now, please, Councillor Osborne.
A role in leading on this. And this whole motion is based on partnership working. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to claim that this amendment somehow increases the chances of partnership working. The motion as it was demonstrated the level of ambition that was needed based on science-based targets. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to indicate, to contribute? No? Okay, Councillor Maguire, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I conclude this motion to amend as I started it. I'm pleased the Green Party are interested in all the work that this Labour administration does to promote and improve the environment. They still need, however, to grasp the realities of achieving a policy, especially if they wish to do so in a manner that protects the poorest and the most vulnerable of our society. They must grasp the reality of progress without wanting to give a lecture on scientific theory. Change and scientific advancement is never smooth. It's without an equal step by equal step. It's a rocky road with setbacks and leaps forward. Advancement is a victim to those infamous events. In the longer term, however, each step becomes a platform for a greater next step. It gives the opportunity for new technologies and other innovation to be pursued and improved. That is why, Lord Mayor, we wish to remove an unnecessary yoke in our work. Our amendment does not take away from the need that we have to work hard on climate change. Rather, it helps to make the transition to carbon neutrality something that can actually be achieved. And I know that this is what Councillor Osborne wants. More importantly, these amendments protect and enhance our critically important capacity to use the crucial partnerships we have and their valuable and often greater resources, money, expertise and skills to actually deliver the physical, on-the-ground changes which the public rightly expect and need. We cannot sacrifice this evening by breaking them unilaterally or arbitrarily. Indeed, Lord Mayor, we must go further in building and strengthen those strategic alliances, and through those alliances, deliver carbon reduction, which everyone in this chamber wants to see. This amendment, if passed, will achieve this, Lord Mayor. I'd just like to address one point that Councillor Osborne, I'll be charitable and assume he didn't quite grasp. I was not talking about government. I was talking about all the partners with which we work. And if we ignore, we will lose their support and the city will never achieve target of carbon neutrality. Lord Mayor, I commend to the council that we amend the motion 9B in order to make this happen.
Thank you. We'll now move to the vote on the amendment. All those in favour? Okay. Got that? Yeah. Okay. Those against? Okay. Thank you. Abstentions? Okay, that's carried. I'd like to invite group spokespersons. Councillor Maguire.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In its final form, the motion has much to commend. It acknowledges the reality of working in a complex, not always supportive environment. It acknowledges the fantastic work that this and previous Labour administrations of this council have done in order to tackle the threats from climate change. In particular, it acknowledges our efforts as an institution and our efforts in partnership with the Mighty Alliance. This administration continues to progress and its ambitions are there to see. Many are listed in the elucidatory points in points 1 and 2 of the motion. Lord Mayor, we do this in partnership. I shan't dwell on point 3 too long because this has been addressed many times, but I must say in an age of austerity, it would be egregious to divert thousands of pounds from the council's precarious but balanced budget in order to deny the poor and the vulnerable in this city. I make reference, as I have many times before, to the government's recently held Citizens' Assembly. Other local authorities have also spent tens of thousands on similar ventures. There is already all the citizen advice that we would wish for. This is far from the first time that the Green Party have asked for a local citizens' assembly. It will get my response every time that I make here. I therefore urge councillors to vote against the third part of the motion. Lord Mayor, the central message of the new motion is that we should work in concert with all our partners who work to reverse climate change. As an alliance, we can achieve so much more. And in that alliance, Norwich has a fighting chance of becoming carbon neutral. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Lubbock.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. I was pleased to support the amendments because I would really like for this council to achieve a consensus on this really important issue. The preamble to this motion draws attention to the link between the climate crisis and the current coronavirus crisis. Our response to both crises has been very different. We've been ready and willing to adapt to changes in our lives to deal with the coronavirus, but to date, we've been slow to recognise and adapt to the climate crisis. Is this because the coronavirus is seen as an immediate threat to our way of life and therefore sparks an immediate response with no time to plan for transition? Whereas up until now, the manifestations of the climate crisis have been less obvious, less immediate, something which may or may not happen sometime in the future, and something which has been contentious with not everyone agreeing on the science. Consequently, our reaction to changing our lifestyle to combat the climate crisis has been slow and in some cases non-existent. All the more reason why this council needs to accelerate plans to a just and fairer transition to a low carbon, more sustainable economy through partnership working. The government have shown little leadership on the climate crisis, seeking to prioritise the economy over the environment. So it's been left very much to local authorities to press ahead with transition plans. However, we have to start by acknowledging the limitations of this council as a district council with limited resources and authority, with depleted reserves of 7 million due to the COVID support and measures it's undertaken, and with the organisation continually adapting to the changing circumstances. So I'm very pleased that we are working with partners to push ahead with this vital transition, and I hope that we can all agree to support this this very important motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other councillors indicate who wish to contribute? Councillor Mike Sands.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. While I do support the amended motion, I of course cannot support the last part, which talks about the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership. If our green cousins don't understand that they are already members of a citizens' assembly, then they do not understand their role as elected members. I quote from an article in The Guardian in May 2013. The councillor, as a local representative, occupies a central position in the dynamics of local politics. Many of the tasks that councillors undertake arise from the expectations of those they represent within their wards or divisions. Councillors can find themselves one moment acting to develop a long-term strategic division that will have long-lasting effects, and the very next moment dealing with the intricate personal problems experienced by one of their constituents. The councillor's job is a 24-hour one. the immediacy of the councillor to local citizens, the fact that the councillor is of those communities and that he or she does not spend their lives as a representative miles away in Westminster is a vital element of their office. So in essence, we already have a citizens' assembly.
Thank you. Anyone else indicated? Sorry, oh, Councillor Stuteley.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. Yeah, I support this this motion with the exception of point 3 as amended. Other councillors have talked about the importance of working together, so it's a good opportunity to commend Clive Lewis MP for Norwich South, for his work on the Green New Deal bill that came to fruition earlier in the year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stuteley. Any others wish to speak on this? No. Okay. Councillor Osborne, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And thank you to everyone who's spoken about the need for consensus and working together on this. I'd just like to put a bit of context into Councillor Maguire's comments about the fantastic work that the council has done. The Tyndall Centre says that if we carry on at current emissions levels, we will use up our carbon budget within 7 years. That's not very long. So, you know, as much as the council has done, there needs to be stepped up action. And of course, that needs to be including or with support from government. There's very little that this council can actually do on its own without that. Lends urgency to the need for science-based and ambitious targets. Councillor Maguire referred to the sort of progress of science. And let me just be clear that these targets are a minimum, and the actions that are laid out in this motion are a minimum, and it's not going to get any easier. It's only going to get harder, and the action that will be needed will get steeper the further down the line we go, and the impacts will become even worse. So we don't have any time to waste. I also recognise that the council is working in partnership, and I absolutely want to support that, and that's one of the reasons for bringing this motion, which focuses very strongly on partnership working. Nevertheless, Councillor Maguire talked about breaking alliances by having a strong science-based target. I'd want to ask whether the alliances that we have currently, if they're not meeting that 12.7% year-on-year target, are they sufficient? You know, we have a fighting chance of being carbon neutral by working together, but will we be doing that soon enough? You know, this is really urgent and serious, and so it's got to be a question of when do we do this. To address the point about the Citizens' Assembly, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding from Councillor Sands about what Citizens' Assembly is. It's a proportionally selected group of citizens brought together to engage in participatory democracy, where they discuss over a number of weekends or days, working out issues on a common solution. And the reason that this is really important is, as Councillor Maguire will know, that we have to have buy-in from all levels of society in order to achieve reductions in carbon emissions and the transition that we need. So a Citizens' Assembly is a way of doing that, of bringing together all different groups and working for solutions that will work for everyone. And at the same time, it will address some of the power differences and the power inequalities that exist, for example, in the New Anglia LEP. We have to acknowledge that the top 10% of people are responsible for 50% of emissions globally. And this is a really unequal crisis. And so by actually opening up decision making,
can you start to wind up now, please, Councillor Osborne?
The New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership and giving power to people themselves, that's got to be the future, I believe.
Thank you.
Nevertheless, I'm glad that this motion is being supported. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to take the vote on this item in parts. I will ask members to vote on all resolutions, excluding resolution 3, which we will take as a separate vote. As a reminder, officers will put the final substantive motion on the screen now, and we'll move to the vote momentarily. Okay, we'll now move to the vote on all resolutions, excluding resolution 3. All those against? Okay. Abstentions? Okay. In favour? Okay. Thank you. The resolution has been carried. We'll now move on to vote on resolution 3. All those against? Okay, thank you. Abstentions? No. In favour? Resolution 3 has fallen. Yeah. Did we get Councillor Davis there? She's left. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And we're at that magic time. Well, there's 2 hours have passed since the start of the meeting. I need to ask if members are agreeable to the remaining items should be taken as unopposed business. Does any member wish to oppose the amendments to item 9C, which have been accepted by the proposer and circulated? No. No objections? Does any member wish to oppose motion 9C as amended? Does any member wish to oppose motion 9D? Items 9C as amended and 9D have been passed as unopposed business. That's the end of the business then, end of the meeting. Thank you very much and good night from me and stay safe.